The Gospel passage from Matthew chapter 13, 1 to 23 can be looked from allegorical historical perspective. Each biblical scholars view the passage in a different way. Some biblical scholars view the parable allegorically, assigning symbolic meanings to each element. This perspective invites us, the listeners, to explore the deeper spiritual meanings behind the parable and consider how they apply to our lives. We see in the parable the birds of the air, the thorns, rocky ground, and a good soil. Historical context. Some biblical scholars examine the historical context in which Jesus spoke the parable, considering agricultural practices and audiences' familiarity with farming. Understanding this historical context helps us grasp the original message intended to impact and apply to our contemporary context. Literary genre. Matthew's Gospel presents the parable with a larger literary framework, emphasizing Jesus' teaching ministry. It calls us to recognize the literary genre, to appreciate the unique purpose and function of the parable within the overall narrative, and apply its teachings accordingly in our lives. The four types of soil. The scholars debate the symbolic representation of the different soils and their significance. Thorns, wayside, stony soil, good soil, and how the seed behaviors in each of the types of soil. Reflecting on the various interpretations encourages us to assess our own receptiveness to God's Word and make necessary adjustment to cultivate fertile soil in our hearts. Interpretation and fruitfulness. When we explore the notion of fruitfulness in the light of the parable and its broader theological implication, considering different perspectives on fruitfulness prompts us to examine the quality and impact of our Christian lives and strive to bear fruit that aligns with God's kingdom values. Theological and pastoral perspective. The biblical scholars offer theological and pastoral insight to parable, exploring themes like grace, human responsibility, and discipleship. Engaging with these perspectives encourages us to deepen our understanding of God's grace in our lives, embrace our responsibility as faithful disciples, and apply the teachings of the parable to our spiritual growth. As a Christian, how one receives the God's Word with listening heart that brings in grace, that brings in spiritual growth. We can look from the potential of the seed, how the soil is prepared, and how we receive God's Word, the seed in our lives. Interpreting the sower. Sower's actions and the implications for the spread of the gospel. Reflecting on the sower's role challenges us to participate actively in spreading God's Word and sharing the good news with others, regardless of the response we may encounter. We all strive to be good soil and allow God's Word to transform our lives. As you reflect this Sunday on the parable of the sower, let's deepen our own personal reflection and spiritual growth. Integrating these perspectives prompts us to assess our own spiritual receptiveness, consider the barriers that hinder our growth, and take practical steps to cultivate fertile soil that yields a bountiful harvest. Consider moments when God's word or presence fell in the good soil of your heart and soul. Were there also times when the soil was rocky or beaten down? Were there times where you were tempted away from God and got lost in the weeds? What does it mean to you to be an adopted child of God? How do you imagine God feels about you? Jesus is God's Son, whose words find a place to grow in our hearts. But we cultivate the soil the word is planted in. It begins at baptism, as we strive to become the daughters and sons of God. It continues our whole life. And whatever trial or suffering we face, we know that the full fruit of our adoption will be revealed at the end. Let us strive to be good soil and allow God's word to transform our lives.